begotten Son.
I know John 3:16.
Whoever believeth
I'm
in
not
him
interested in John.
would not perish,
That's why
but
scholars
have everlasting life.
Let's look at the early
It says,
gospel.
he that has the Son has life. He that does
There
not
will now
have
be
the
a
Son
commercial break.
does not have life.
Have a
That's
cup of
what
tea,
Jesus
have a cup of
said.
coffee.
Isn't that right?
Go to the lavatory.
Whoever has the Son
There's now going to be a
has
break
life.
until he's
He says,
finished.
he that believeth on me will not perish. That's what Jesus said.
Okay.
That's what he
so
preached.
coming back to the earlier Gospels, what is Jesus in his Gospel
No,
to the
absolutely
Jews?
not. Because
I think so, but there's clear cases in the Gospels,
No,
the
no.
Synoptic Gospels, where Jesus is claiming divinity. So,
No, what was his message?
Not
What was his
angry.
message?
yeah, I mean, I think the
Well,
message
when he
is
went
that
around preaching to people in Nazareth and Galilee, what was his message? What was it? What is the
that
Gospel?
the kingdom of heaven was at hand.
And what is the kingdom of heaven?
Himself, right?
Okay. Does he say that? Did he say that, or did he say his Father's kingdom?
His Father's kingdom.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and Father is who in Judaism? God. Right. So, talking about God's kingdom in breaking in the world. Okay. So, how are we saved? What must I do to? How are we? This is a very precise question. There's a reason for me asking. How are we justified before God? Because this really matters to Paul, by the way, and to the reformers like Martin Luther, who talk about
How we are justified by
sola
before God
fide.
is by faith.
But what did Jesus actually teach about? I mean, should I give you the answer, or do you?
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
just go
So
ahead.
in Luke's Gospel, he told the story of the tax collector and the Pharisee. Both got up to the temple to pray. The tax collector, the bad guy, he collects taxes on behalf of the Romans. He won't even look up to heaven. He beats his chest and says, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." The Pharisee, the good guy, he obeys the law. Looks at the tax collector according to Jesus. This is Jesus' teaching according to Luke, and says, "Thank God I'm not like that tax collector. I fast, I pray." Or a Muslim might say, "I fast during Ramadan. I pray 5 times a day. I'm not like this sinner." And Jesus said, the tax collector went home justified before God. Wow. Why would Jesus say that? The man who wouldn't even look up to heaven and beat his chest and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." Why? Because according to Jesus, whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. What do Muslims do when they put their head on the floor in prayer 5 times a day in worship and prayer to their Creator? They're humbling themselves before their Creator.
Who's their creator?
Right? Because they are submitting to Him.
Who is their creator?
So when I hear that teaching of Jesus about justification, I then think, what did Paul teach? How are we justified before
That's
God?
your
According to the
theology.
Apostle Paul. According
That's
to
not
him,
biblical
he
theology.
said,
That's your
and he says in
opinion.
Romans and Galatians,
That's your
we are
interpretation.
justified by faith in Jesus and His death on the cross for our sins.
That's correct.
That is a different religion than one Jesus
No, it is
taught.
not. It is not, and I can tell you the difference
No,
between
I
Paul.
want to hear
I
his
know
answer.
you don't, because you don't want to hear the truth.
I don't want to hear you.
No, you don't.
I don't want to hear you. I want
Exactly.
to hear what John says.
So I think
No, the gospel. What
No,
Jesus
you can't say
preached-
no. I'm talking to him, not you.
Let me fill in here. Jesus came to preach the gospel of the kingdom. The gospel of the kingdom was in fulfillment of the expectation of the Jew,
sure.
right?
I know
The
that.
expectation of the Jew, right? Okay, so Jesus is that prophet was preaching of the gospel, the kingdom that was to come. The kingdom that was to come. Paul came as an interim message. Paul's message was in between Jesus. There was a gap between what Jesus prophesied and when it would be fulfilled. Paul came to fill that gap. So Paul's gospel is the gospel of the kingdom, is the gospel of Christ. Paul's gospel is the gospel of Christ, which is very different from the gospel of the kingdom. The gospel of the kingdom is future.
you might have
Right?
Yeah, but let me
Yeah,
finish.
but the gospel of Christ is present. That's why Paul says, Paul says, "I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation."
So
he's
I think the
speaking
biggest
of
thing.
Paul's gospel.
So I think the biggest thing is that okay. So I hear what you're saying, and that actually I could see the point. Even though you do have to understand that there are claims of divinity within the Synoptic Gospel.
There's a separate issue. At this stage, I'm interested
Right,
in
it
the
is a
message
separate,
of how we're justified before God.
Sure.
The divinity issue is a separate question. We can address that in a sec. But according to Jesus, we're justified by humbling ourselves before our Creator, which is exactly what Islam teaches, actually, in the Quran. But according to Paul, that's not how we're justified. So, in a sense, I'm asking, who has priority for us as human beings? What Paul taught or what Jesus taught? And we all agree that God sent Jesus.
He knows I know what I'm
Everyone agrees, apart from Jews, that God sent Jesus. And so whatever Jesus takes, we automatically prefer over any purely human message. And that's why I'm a Muslim, because what Jesus taught about God and salvation is pretty much what Islam teaches. There are differences in the legal thing, the law, because we believe the Sharia has supplanted the Halakha, the Jewish Torah. But in terms of our understanding of Jesus, who Jesus was and salvation, we're with Jesus completely.
But don't you think that you need to give credit to the Gospel of John? And the reason I say that is because the book of Acts also seems to validate that, because it shares the story of after Jesus is ascended into heaven, that the gospel, like in Acts chapter 3, Peter's first speech to the early church. I mean, this is 40 days right after the crucifixion and resurrection, right?
Yes.
And yet he is preaching Christ died for your sins.
Exactly. Right? And this is really, I'm glad you brought that passage up, because I actually forgotten about it. But let's focus on that very passage in Acts chapter 2. What does Peter say about Jesus? Okay, he said, paraphrase the NIV, Jesus was a man accredited by God who did signs and wonders amongst you by the power of God, as you yourselves know. Now, the passage does say Jesus was crucified, you're absolutely right. But in terms of the God issue, like Jesus being God, Jesus being divine, Peter here explicitly says Jesus is not God. And this is, as you say, after the crucifixion, after the ascension, after Pentecost. He says Jesus was a man accredited by God. Now, if he believed what Christians believe today, he would have said Jesus was the second person of the Holy Trinity. He was divine, he was God incarnate, he was whatever terms you want to use. He never said that. In fact, in Acts, let's take this passage. In this passage, he doesn't call Jesus God. He says he was a man. And this is because that's reflecting the very earliest understanding of Jesus amongst the disciples, I would argue. Why would he say he was a man if he was divine?
I mean, I'd have to read, because I don't know what translation you're reading.
NIV.
NIV, okay. So
which is the standard evangelical translation in America.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to reread it.
But any translation
I guess it's just more like I'm looking at it from the historical context, because for me, to me there seems to be a historical synergy with the Gospels and then a continuation of the church that we see today even.
We see which church, you see, it's a very Catholic argument, but the problem I have with that is earliest Christianity was very diverse. I mentioned James, I mentioned Paul, even Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians, talks about those who say, I follow Peter, I follow Paul, I follow Peter, whatever. So it's very splintered. But there is plenty of evidence to suggest there was a massive schism between the so-called Jewish Christians and the more Hellenist Gentile Christians who represent the Paul party, if you like, or the religion that emerged from Paul, a non-Torah religion. And Christianity originally didn't exist. The Jesus movement was a reform movement within Judaism, I would argue, that ultimately left behind Judaism, the Torah, temple worship, and became a Gentile religion focused on the worship of Jesus. And that is a complete change from the original religion of Jesus' disciples. And all this took place within a century. So you get Ignatius of Antioch in his letters, beginning of 2nd century, telling people not to follow Judaism. Don't follow Judaism, follow Christianity. And that is the earliest time in history where the word Christianity is mentioned, by the way. Christianity is mentioned in the Ignatius of Antioch. So here we have a clear split, a parting of the ways between Judaism and Christianity. But originally, there was only Judaism. And that's the religion that Jesus followed. Muslims believe that the religion of Moses, the religion of the Jewish prophets, is all from God. And we also believe Jesus is from God. But Christians don't follow that. So if I were to ask you, and I always ask you, it's a bit unfair, I don't mean to be, but I'll ask you, do you like pork? Do you like a nice ham sandwich? Of course you do. But Jesus upheld the law on this, according to Matthew. And basically you're not supposed to. If you follow Jesus, you don't eat pork, because the Torah prohibits it. The only people who follow that law now are Muslims. So when it comes to actually following the life of Jesus, I think Muslims are much closer to the religion of Jesus than today's Christians who follow the religion of Paul and the later church. which is the Catholic Church.
I mean, I think that's a whole separate discussion.
True.
But I think for me, like when I'm studying the two, it really hinges on who did Jesus claim he is, and that's why.
But who did he claim he is?
I mean, I think he did claim to be God.
Where? Apart from John?
Yeah, I mean, I think within the Synoptic Gospels, he talks about the...
Say Mark, for example, the earliest.
Well,
where does he claim to be God in Mark?
The first one that comes to my mind is the passage of before Abraham was, I am.
But that's in John. You see, the thing is, there's some wonderful statements in the Bible on the lips of Jesus. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Before Abraham was, I am. I am the light of the world. I am the resurrection. I am the good shepherd. All these amazing I am statements. But they're only found in one book in the entire Bible, the Gospel of John. Interesting. If Jesus went around preaching, saying publicly, I am the light of the world, for example, or before Abraham was, I am, taking the tetragrammaton upon his own lips, why, oh why, does no one before that gospel know anything about this? Q doesn't report Jesus speaking like this. Neither does Mark, neither does Luke, neither does Matthew, neither does L. All of our early sources, not one of them has Jesus speaking like this. Only towards the end of the first century do we find Jesus speaking like this in the Gospel of John. So historians, this is something E.P. Saunders actually discusses in his book, have had to choose. Do we go with John's portrait of Jesus, claiming divinity, which you believe, or do we go with the earlier Gospels, where Jesus never says any of this publicly, and they have overwhelming 99% have chosen to go with the earlier Gospels as true of the historical Jesus. If you do that, though, your divine Jesus is not there.
Yeah, to me though, like when you look at the synergy of the book of Acts, right, because you look at the disciples carrying on the legacy of Jesus, right, the Great Commission that we read about. Jesus says, go and disciple.
You mean Matthew 28?
What's that?
Matthew 28, you mean?
Yeah, but then that's continued on into the book of Acts.
Is it though? I would question that. Completely question that.
We can question it.
Because in the book of Acts 28, where the Great Commission, which I don't think is historical for a number of reasons, but anyway, it says, go into all the nations, ta ethne in Greek. I remember it here. If you look at the early church in Acts, say at Pentecost, they're all Jews. There are no Gentiles. But hey, how can you say that, Paul? Because there are people from all over the world mentioned at Pentecost. So how can they not be? No, they're all diaspora Jews. It actually says that. There are no Gentiles in the earliest Christian community at Pentecost. Isn't that interesting? So the earliest church was not interested in bringing in Gentiles. That's the whole dispute with Paul. Remember? Paul says, no, the Gentiles also can be part of our movement without becoming Jews. But the original disciples say you've got to become a Jew to follow the Jewish Messiah and follow the law. Makes sense. If I want to be a Jew today, I can't say I'm not going to follow the law.
Yeah, I don't think that was just Paul, though, because there's also, granted, this is from the book of Acts, but it's also the account of Peter, who has the vision of the unclean animals, and he's heard 3 times, rise, kill, and eat, right? Yeah. And then God says, don't.
But this is a vision, which does say that, but at the very end of that passage, Peter exclaims, now I understand what? What's this vision about?
That is the message for the Gentiles, right?
Yes, it's not about clean and unclean food. Yeah, so it's not about food. Okay, yeah. But you see, if that's true, just for sake of argument, if that vision in Acts 10, is it? I think so, yeah. If that actually happened, how do you explain Matthew 28? Because at the end of Jesus' ministry, apparently, well, it does say in Matthew 28, Jesus commanding Peter to go into all the nations.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. But only much later, in a vision that Peter resists. No, I've never, this is not possible. Peter's just heard this news for the first time in Acts. It doesn't make sense. So the reason why Matthew 28 is not seen as historical is because it uses the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, this triadic language, which reflects a later first century context. When Christians started to believe, you use this kind of language of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Secondly, about going into all the world. The early Christians didn't do that. They stayed in Jerusalem, actually. They were Jews. It wasn't for the Gentiles. Yeah, the Gentiles would come to Jerusalem and worship the Jewish God, but they weren't. You had to become a Jew to be a follower of Jesus, because he's a Jewish Messiah. So it's not seen as historical. Even by quite conservative scholars like Jimmy Dunn, I noticed when I read him on this.
Matthew or the Book of Acts?
Matthew 28.
Okay.
Because because the earliest Christians didn't go out into all the world. This is a late first century perspective on Jesus' mission, not particularly historical. Else, how would you explain Acts? Why does Peter have this amazing vision that is like, oh my God, which says Gentiles as well? But he should already know this from Acts 28.
Well, I mean, think of how many times that God has had to speak to your heart, right, to get you to, right? Like, sometimes people need multiple experiences to get them onto the right path.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but you see the context of Acts, like in Pentecost, where all the people who were energized by Pentecost were all Jews. There were no Gentiles. And the whole dispute over the law, you know, do Gentiles have to be circumcised and all the rest of it? This is all new. They never quote Jesus on this. They don't say, well, Jesus says Gentiles, when they come into the kingdom, will not have to be circumcised, or they can eat pork. He never says that. They don't draw on Jesus' teaching. Have you noticed that? When they're talking, Paul never quotes Jesus. James doesn't quote Jesus on this subject because he never spoke on it. That's why he never expected the Jews. Indeed, in Matthew 15, Jesus said, "I've only been sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." When he basically called a Canaanite woman a dog, according to Matthew 15, anyway. He used racist abuse. Did you know that story?
Yeah.
He actually called a Canaanite woman a dog, which is pretty abusive. I'm not saying the historical Jesus said that, but that's how Matthew portrays him. But that's a typical Jewish attitude towards Gentiles. Then, I should say.
Yeah.
Same here.
I'm not sure, is this even now? Well, they see them as subhuman, some Jews in Israel at the moment. We've seen this. Palestinians are characterised as less than human. So all I'm trying to say, people like Jimmy Dunn, the British professor of New Testament studies at Durham University, have written massively on this. He's a Trinitarian Christian, about the great diversity within the Jesus movement in the earliest church, and how Christology developed and evolved over time. It wasn't like they believed Jesus was God in the beginning. Peter says in Acts 2, which you referenced, Jesus was a man accredited to you by God, through whom did the signs and miracles amongst you. So God worked these miracles through Jesus. Jesus didn't do them off his own back. If he was God, he wouldn't have done them through any other agency. It would be through his own power. But Peter says it was through the power of God. And that's exactly what the Quran says. There's actually a paragraph in the Quran, to paraphrase it, which says exactly that. Jesus did the miracles by the permission of God. So Peter and the Quran agree actually on that.
All right. Yeah. Good stuff to think on. Thank you. I appreciate your time. I've read it before. Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that's good.
Yeah, I've read it too. Nice talking to you, John.
No, I appreciate. I've been watching a lot of your videos, and it's been super helpful.
Everything I'm saying now is all borrowed stuff. There's nothing original. I just borrowed.
No, but it was really helpful because I really wanted to nitpick that very specific time and place, because it's like the area that I'm most.
Because sensitive scholar historians now is that Jesus himself did not think that he was God. But there's something I didn't mention, and I kind of do want to mention just for the sake of the record, that in the ancient Greco-Roman world, even within Judaism actually, you could call a really great man divine, or even God. Actually.
Sure, yeah, that's like the Greek.
Exactly,
Greek,
and most Jews were Greek-speaking Jews. So to say someone was divine doesn't necessarily mean what modern Christians think that means. So if I say someone is God now, and I was a Christian, I say, well, he's the creator, he's Yahweh, he's the God of the universe. No. That's not what they meant. They would have meant, here is a man who is joined God in heaven. He's been resurrected to heaven. He's part of the celestial realm. He's divine. That's what the ancient Romans, Greek and Roman believed. But a lot of people actually, not just Jesus. So that belief was quite common in the cultural milieu at the time. So it's not that remarkable. But that's different from what the Council of Nicaea decreed in in the 4th century, where they declared, using Greek metaphysics, that the Son was of the same substance as the Father. homoousion, to use the Greek. Homo meaning the same, ousia meaning substance or being. That Jesus was the same being as the Father. This is hardcore metaphysics, which is quite a leap, I would suggest, from the fairly loose use of divinity language that Plato is called divine, Moses is called divine. Philo of Alexandria, have you heard of Philo of Alexandria, the great Jewish biblical scholar and commentator? Lived pretty much around the time of Jesus, just before. He was a Jew, he wasn't a Christian, he was a Jewish biblical scholar. He actually calls Moses Theos in his commentary. I've read it. Theos is the Greek word for God. But he did not believe Moses was Yahweh, obviously. He was a Jew, but he was using this kind of Hellenistic language to talk about great men. So when Hellenistic Christians called Jesus divine, I'm underwhelmed by that. I mean, of course they would, because that's how you spoke about great men. Jews spoke about Moses as Theos. I mean, it's all completely wrong in my view, because that language is only reserved for the true, one true God. I don't think Jesus would approve of that either. But it's not remarkable. It's not like, oh my God, Jesus came to be divine, or they called him divine. Isn't this amazing? But of course they would have done, because they called also other people divine as well in the ancient world. It's what the culture was like. When the world's leading Jewish scholar in the ancient world, Philo of Alexandria, calls Moses Theos, you know you've got an issue. And that's not unique. He was never scandalized, oh my God, this guy's a heretic. No, he was, so even the Bible actually calls human beings God. David is called God in Psalm 45. He's directly addressed as God. Psalm 45, look it up, folks.
I think that's why the Gospel of John, I think, is so powerful. If it actually is the words of Jesus, why it's quoted so much is because Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am, which is basically drawing on that special name like nobody claims.
But he also sees God as someone else. So he says, this is eternal life. He's praying to God. Is it John chapter 17 verses 1 to 3? This is eternal life, that they may worship you, the only true God, and Jesus whom you have sent. So even at times Jesus in John clearly distinguishes and separates himself from God. The only true God. He's not saying I am the only true God. And also, by finding a bit of evidence, at the end of the Gospel of John, what does the author of that Gospel say the purpose of this Gospel is?
To account the stories of Jesus, correct?
Yeah, but yes, okay. The purpose of the Gospel is that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah. That's the purpose of the Gospel. I can say amen to that. Every Muslim can. Every Muslim believes Jesus is the Messiah. It doesn't say that Jesus is God. This is Messiah. A Messiah is a human being. There are lots of Messiahs in the Bible. David is a Messiah. Cyrus the Great was even a Gentile. It's called the Messiah in Isaiah, obviously. All the kings are anointed by God. So that's a claim to the humanity of Jesus, and that's the purpose of that gospel.
So what, as final thoughts, what if you were to focus just, or give me references, or give me things to read that are specific to the book of the Gospel of John? Because I feel like for me, that's the central point. Because when I read the Gospel of John, I'm like, to me, it's undeniable that Jesus is claiming.
I know. I mean, I'll admit to you in public here. This is quite an embarrassing confession. When I was a Christian, I came across this. When I came across biblical scholarship, because I was looking for answers to problems I encountered in the Bible. So I went to responsible biblical scholars who were Christians, people I could trust, people like Jimmy Dunn I mentioned. And boy, did I get a shock, because I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't know that for the last 2 centuries, that the vast majority of biblical scholars, who are mostly Christian, do not see John as historical. In the words of Jesus, say in John, as historical. They see them as secondary. This is a euphemism for made up. I mean, it hurt me, because I wanted to believe that Jesus said these things. So I had to ask a very, very painful question. Why are scholars saying this? And that took an awful lot of guts on my part, if I may say so. It took me a long time to really come to terms with what the experts were saying about John's Gospels. It was not easy, really. I found really conservative like Craig Blomberg, an American biblical scholar at Denver Seminary, I think.
The name sounds very familiar.
Yeah, he's a real biblical scholar. He's written on John, and I really look for anyone who could help me to still believe that John was historical. The words attributed to John were historical. I'm not saying John is all fiction, it's not. I mean, there are other aspects which I'm not going to go into, like the chronology is probably more accurate than synoptics. But I'm talking here about the sayings of Jesus. But I came to the conclusion, very painfully, as a Christian, that the arguments that Christian scholars themselves, representing historians, that the words attributed to Jesus and John are not historical, I found those arguments to be very powerful and persuasive. Now, this is not a chemistry lesson. This is not like proof. You do a chemistry. I'm certain this outcome, this is absolute fact, because science proves X. This is not like that. This is history. So what we can only say responsibly is it's very unlikely. Notice the caveat there. Very unlikely that Jesus spoke like that. It's theoretically possible because we can't go back in a time machine.
Right.
But it's very unlikely. Why? Because all the earlier evidence is against that. If Jesus went around publicly speaking like that, which John says he was, not in private, not with his disciples in the hidden room, but publicly, why did no one else ever record him doing that? Why did Luke, who boasts at the beginning that I'm recording all of these things in an orderly way for you, dear Theophilus, why did he omit to mention these sayings? Why? Why did Matthew omit them? Why did Mark omit them? Why did Q omit them? Why did M omit them? Why did L? All of our recognised multiple independent sources never record him speaking like that. That's the challenge, and I came to the conclusion, like everyone else, by the way, because he didn't. It's a late first century sermonizing, meditation, reflection on the significance of Jesus for the author of the fourth gospel. That is the standard view now of everyone. Apart from maybe some fundamentalist seminaries in the United States, maybe in Tennessee, who would disagree with that, fine. But they disagree with it not for historical reasons, but because they believe the Bible is inerrant, it's without error. So if Jesus is presented as saying something, of course he said that, because the Bible says he said that. But that's not how we do history today. That's a religious commitment, and you can believe that if you want, but I had to choose between how can I be an intelligent Christian that is open to responsible historical inquiry, and I had to choose, and I chose what I did, and that ultimately led me to Islam, because I realized the Jesus of history is actually very similar to the Jesus of the Quran in terms of what he preached, in terms of who he was, his relationship to God, and so on. Very similar. And this is the great fact that people don't realize. If you want to follow Jesus today, you're probably better off becoming a Muslim, because it's the same religion in essence. And that was a big revelation to me. And I'm serious, by the way. And all the fundamentals of Jesus taught and who he was, Islam is in agreement with history. Christians are not generally, unless they're quite liberal, in terms of Christology anyway. So I invite you to Islam, because if you want to be a true follower of Jesus, you must today be a Muslim. It's the only religion in the world that says you must follow Jesus and gets him right. Jews deny Jesus. Christians worship Jesus, which is a sin of idolatry. That's why Jews won't go into a church, because they see it as a temple of idolatry. If you speak to Jews, they'll tell you this. But Jews can go into mosques to pray if they ever wanted to, in emergency, I suppose, and they are allowed to pray in mosques. I mean, because they're not, because mosques are places of true monotheism, true Tawheed. So, follow Jesus. Follow all the prophets of God, including the last prophet of God, Muhammad, upon him be peace, and then you will be saved. That's the only way to be saved today.
Well,
what can I say?
A lot of research to do.
Yeah.
Right, John. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Pleasure talking. I appreciate your. What's the word? You're extremely good. It's been good talking to you. It's not always like that down here.
Unfortunately.
You're a good listener.
A good listener. That's exactly.
That's the
very respectful. Very respectful.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
All right, cheers, John.
Right path,
Right, take these things off me.
You got a whole load of them.
Yeah, I know. It's like being infested with flies or something. He was a very good. I mean, it was very kind of him to listen like that.
Yeah, he was very
respectful.
Yeah, respectful.
Yeah, just I'm not used to that. Down here.
Did you accept Islam? Inshallah.
Okay. Nothing to everyone.
Yeah, I didn't want to be on YouTube. Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Jazak Allah Khair.
I blur your face.